The whistle of the train pierced the air as it pulled away from Pinewood Springs station, leaving behind nothing but billowing clouds of steam and a woman standing alone on the platform. Her trunk sat beside her, a small valise clutched in trembling, hands and tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the last railcar disappeared around the bend, Clara Bennett realized the truth that would change her life forever. The man who had promised to marry her wasn't coming. Her journey of 1,000 miles had led her to abandonment in a town where she knew no one, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the painful limp that had apparently cost her a husband before she'd even met him. But fate works in mysterious ways on the American frontier. From the shadows of the station emerged a tall figure, his left sleeve pinned empty at the shoulder, his face bearing the marks of a war that had ended a decade ago, but still raged within him. Samuel Harper had come to collect a package, not to find a wife. Yet as their eyes met across that empty platform, neither could have imagined how their broken pieces would someday fit together to create something whole. The year was 1875, and spring had finally reached the mountains of Colorado. Pinewood Springs was buzzing with the promise of new beginnings as the railroad brought supplies, mail, and occasionally new residents seeking fortune in the mines or the dense forests that gave the town its name. For Clara Bennett, this remote outpost represented her last chance at the life she had always dreamed of. Clara stood alone on the platform, the fading sound of the train whistle echoing in her ears. Her leg ached from the long journey, the childhood. In polio that had left her with a pronounced limp now making itself known after days of sitting in cramped quarters. She smoothed down her best dress, a modest blue cotton that had seen better days, and tried to calm her racing heart. Edmund Walsh had described himself as a successful shopkeeper in need of a wife. His letters, though not romantic, had been kind and practical. He'd promised a comfortable home, respect, and perhaps in time, affection. For a 26-year-old schoolteacher with a noticeable disability and no family left, it had seemed like providence. The station master approached, his expression a mixture of pity and awkwardness. "Miss Bennett, there's no one here to meet you." He shuffled his feet, avoiding her eyes. "Mr. Walsh left town 3 days ago, sold his shop and moved on to Denver. From what I hear." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. "There must be some mistake. He's expecting me. I have his letters." Her voice trailed off as she fumbled in her reticule for proof that was suddenly meaningless. "I'm sorry, miss. Word around town is he found out about your—" The station master glanced down at her leg, then quickly away. "Condition. Said he needed a wife who could work the shop floor for long hours." Heat flooded Clara's face. Edmund had known about her limp. She'd been forthright in her letters, not wanting to arrive under false pretenses. Had he simply ignored that part? Or had he decided, after their correspondence, that a woman with a disability wasn't worth the trouble? The station master cleared his throat. "There's a boarding house in town, Martha Wilson's place. She might take you in until you figure out what's next. It's a fair walk, though." Clara squared her shoulders. "I can manage. Is there someone who can carry my trunk?" "I can help with that." The deep voice came from behind her. Clara turned to see a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that told stories of hardship. His right cheek bore a long scar that disappeared into his beard, and his left sleeve was pinned up at the shoulder where an arm should have been. His eyes, though, they were a clear, steady blue that met hers without pity or judgment. "Samuel." "Harper," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "I was coming to collect a shipment, but I've got my wagon outside. I can take you and your things to Martha's." The station master visibly relaxed. "That's decent of you, Harper. Miss Bennett here finds herself in a difficult situation." Clara wanted to refuse, Pride demanded she not accept charity, especially from a stranger. But practicality won out. Night would fall soon, and she had nowhere to go in a town she didn't know. "Thank you, Mr. Harper. I would appreciate the assistance." Sam nodded, then hefted her trunk with his one arm, displaying a strength that made the heavy luggage seem like nothing. Clara followed him out of the station, her limp more pronounced after the long journey. She felt the stares of the few people gathered outside, heard the whispers that followed her, the mail-order bride nobody wanted, the crippled woman left behind. Sam's wagon was simple but well-maintained. He loaded her trunk and then offered his hand to help her climb up. Clara hesitated for just a moment before accepting, noting the calluses on his palm and the gentle strength with which he steadied her. As they drove through town, Clara took in her surroundings with a schoolteacher's eye for detail. Pinewood Springs was larger than she'd expected. A church spire rose above the main street, several shops lined the thoroughfare, and homes in various states of construction spoke to a growing community. In another circumstance, she might have found it charming. "I'm sorry about Walsh," Sam said after they had traveled in silence for several minutes. "He wasn't worthy of you." Clara glanced at him, surprised by both his words and the anger simmering beneath them. "You know him? Know of him? He's not well regarded by those who value character over appearances." Sam kept his eyes on the road ahead. "He spreads rumors about my condition, says I'm touched in the head because of the war. Makes folks nervous about buying my honey." "You keep bees?" Clara asked, eager to change the subject from her humiliation. A ghost of a smile crossed Sam's face. 20 hives. Best honey in the territory, though you wouldn't know it from my sales in town." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of a 2-story house with a neat garden and a sign that read, "Wilson's Boarding House." Before Clara could say anything more, the door opened and a plump woman with grey-streaked brown hair emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Samuel Harper, what brings you to town on a Tuesday?" Her gaze shifted to Clara, curiosity evident in her expression. "Martha, this is Miss Clara Bennett. She needs lodging." Sam's explanation was brief but sufficient. Martha's eyes widened slightly as she took in Clara's travel-worn appearance. Understanding dawned on her face. "You're Edmund Walsh's bride." Clara flinched at the words. "It appears Mr. Walsh had a change of heart." Martha's expression softened. "Well then, he's a bigger fool than I already thought him to be. Come inside, dear. I've got a room that might suit you." Clara turned to thank Sam, but he was already unloading her trunk. "Mr. Harper, I'm grateful for your assistance. Please let me pay you for your trouble." Sam shook his head. "No trouble." He set the trunk down on the porch, then hesitated. "Miss Bennett." "Yes?" "Pinewood Springs isn't always kind to those who are different, but it's not all bad either." He touched the brim of his hat in a polite gesture. "Good day to you." Clara watched him climb back into his wagon and drive away, his straight back and proud posture at odds with the whispers she'd already heard about the damaged veteran. She recognized in that moment that they shared something beyond their physical limitations, the burden of being seen as less than whole in a world that prized perfection. Martha showed Clara to a small but clean room on the second floor. "It's $5 a week, includes meals. I don't usually take long-term boarders, but we can figure something out until you decide your next steps." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I won't impose for long. I just need to..." Clara's composure finally cracked, tears welling in her eyes, despite her best efforts. Martha's hand came to rest on her shoulder. "You've had a shock, dear. Rest tonight." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next. Alone in the room, Clara unpacked her meager belongings, including the books she'd brought, her most treasured possessions. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the bundle of Edmund's letters, reading them again with new eyes. The promises now rang hollow, the kind words nothing but empty platitudes. How could she have been so foolish? She took out paper and pen and began to write to her friend Eleanor back east, the only person she'd left behind who might care about her fate. Dear Eleanor, I have arrived in Colorado only to find that the future I journeyed toward does not exist. Clara paused, the truth of her situation overwhelming her. She had spent nearly every penny on the journey west. There was no money to return east, and nothing to return to if she could. Her parents were gone. The small school where she taught had already hired her replacement, and her childhood home had been sold to pay her father's medical debts. She was alone in a strange town, marked by her limp as surely as if she wore a sign around her neck. The burden of her circumstances pressed down upon her, heavier than it had ever been. Clara set aside the unfinished letter and moved to the window, looking out at the mountains looming in the distance. They were beautiful and immovable, indifferent to her small human troubles. Somewhere out there, Samuel Harper tended his bees and lived with his own burdens. She wondered what had given him the strength to face each day with such quiet dignity. As the sun set behind the mountains, Clara made a silent promise to herself. She would find that same strength within herself somehow. She had to. There was no other choice. The following morning, Clara rose early, dressed in her plainest dress, and ventured downstairs. Martha was already in the kitchen, kneading dough with strong, capable hands. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson. I wonder if you might know of any employment opportunities in town. I was a school teacher in Pennsylvania. I can also sew and keep accounts." Martha looked up, flour dusting her forearms. "The school has a teacher, Mr. Peterson, but he's not well liked. Too fond of the strap, if you ask me." She punched down the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "The mercantile might need help with their books, or there's the dressmaker, though she's particular about who she hires." Clara nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. These were slim prospects indeed. "There's breakfast on the table," Martha added. "Eat before you go out. A full stomach makes for a clearer head." Clara ate quickly, then set out to explore the town that might become her home, however temporarily. The morning was bright, the mountain air crisp and invigorating despite her circumstances. She made her way down the main street, taking note of each business and gathering her courage before entering the mercantile. The bell jingled as she pushed open the door. The shopkeeper, a balding man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. "Good morning," Clara began, summoning her most pleasant smile. "I'm Clara Bennett, recently arrived in town. I'm seeking employment and wondered if you might need assistance, perhaps with keeping your books or tending the shop." The man's gaze dropped briefly to her leg before returning to her face. "No positions available, miss. We're a family business." Clara thanked him and left, fighting back disappointment. The next 3 establishments gave similar responses. By mid-morning, she had worked her way through most of Main Street with nothing to show for it. As she approached the dressmaker's shop, she saw a group of women gathered outside. Their voices hushed, but their glances in her direction making it clear she was the subject of their conversation. "That's her, Walsh's mail-order bride." I heard he took one look at her picture and saw that leg and headed straight for Denver. Can you imagine? Expecting a man to take on damaged goods? Clara's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin and continued walking as though she hadn't heard. Their words stung, echoing her deepest fears, that she was unworthy, unwanted, unfit for the life she sought. By noon, exhausted and disheartened, Clara found herself at the edge of town near the schoolhouse. Children played in the yard, while a thin man with a sour expression watched from the doorway. Through the open windows, she could hear a student struggling through a recitation, followed by the sharp crack of a ruler against a desk. Pathetic, the teacher, presumably Mr. Peterson, barked. Again, and this time without stumbling over every other word. Clara winced. This was not how children learned best. Fear stifled the mind rather than opening it. She remembered her own classroom back east, filled with laughter and discovery, alongside discipline and respect. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the approach of a wagon until it stopped beside her. Miss Bennett, she turned to find Samuel Harper looking down at her from the driver's seat. He had a crate of honey jars beside him and seemed to be making deliveries. Mr. Harper, good day to you. You're a long way from the boarding house. It wasn't quite a question, but curiosity colored his tone. I've been seeking employment. Clara couldn't keep the weariness from her voice. Without success, I'm afraid. Sam studied her for a moment, then glanced at the schoolhouse. You said you were a teacher? In Pennsylvania, yes. For 5 years. Another crack of the ruler, followed by a child's muffled sob, drifted from the schoolhouse. Sam's jaw tightened. Peterson's a tyrant. Half the children in town are falling behind because parents keep them home rather than subject them to his temper. It's a shame, Clara agreed. Children deserve better. Sam seemed to consider something, then made a decision. I'm headed back to my place after one more delivery. If you're interested, I could use help cataloging my library. It's not steady employment, but it's something. Books belong to my grandmother. Been sitting in crates since I inherited the property. Clara's surprise must have shown on her face, for he added quickly, it's not charity. I've been meaning to organize them for years, just never found the time between the bees and everything else. Pride warred with practicality in Clara's mind. She needed money, and the prospect of handling books, even for a day, was infinitely appealing after the morning she'd had. That's very kind of you, Mr. Harper. I accept. Good. He nodded toward the wagon. I can drop you at Martha's on my way out of town. Be ready at 9 tomorrow morning. As Clara watched him drive away after letting her off at the boarding house, she wondered at the contradictions of the man. Gruff yet considerate, solitary yet offering help to a stranger. Perhaps most puzzling was the mention of a library, not what she would have expected from a frontier beekeeper with one arm. That evening at dinner, when Martha learned of Clara's plans, concern creased her brow. Samuel Harper's place? Alone? She shook her head. It's not proper, dear. It's employment, Mrs. Wilson. Clara kept her voice level. And I suspect Mr. Harper is more concerned with his books than with proprieties. Martha sighed. He's a good man for all his troubles. Fought bravely in the war, came back different, like so many did. But people talk. And your reputation... My reputation was left at the train station when Edmund Walsh failed to appear, Clara interrupted, a rare flash of temper coloring her words. I have few options and fewer resources. I cannot afford to turn down honest work because of whispers. Martha studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've got spirit, Clara Bennett. I think you'll need it in this town. That night, Clara wrote again to Eleanor, this time completing the letter. She didn't share all the humiliating details of her arrival, but focused instead on her determination to make her own way. As she wrote about Samuel Harper and his unexpected offer, she realized she was curious about the man and his story. What had he been before the war? What dreams had he carried and which had died on those distant battlefields? She sealed the letter, knowing it might be weeks before it reached Pennsylvania and longer still before she received a reply. By then, her circumstances might be entirely changed. The future that had seemed so certain when she boarded the train east now stretched before her, unmarked and unknown. Clara slept fitfully, her mind filled with the whispers of townswomen and the memory of rejection letters from shopkeepers. But threaded through these darker thoughts was a flicker of curiosity about what tomorrow might bring, about books long packed away and the solitary man who had kept them. The morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of Colorado spring day that made even the most troubled heart lift a little. Clara dressed with care in her sturdiest dress, the navy blue cotton that could withstand dust and wear. She braided her chestnut hair tightly and pinned it up, determined to present herself as capable and professional despite the butterflies in her stomach. This was work, nothing more. The organizing of books for a man who likely had little interest in her beyond her ability to alphabetize and catalog. Martha provided a hearty breakfast and a small packed lunch, her disapproval evident in the tight line of her mouth, but her kindness winning out. "Be back before dark," she cautioned as Clara waited by the front window for Samuel Harper's wagon. Storm clouds gather quick in these mountains, especially this time of year. Clara nodded her agreement, though privately she wondered if Martha's concern was more about propriety than weather. The sound of wagon wheels on packed dirt drew her attention, and she saw Samuel pull up outside, his one good arm handling the reins with practiced ease. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," Clara said as she made her way down the porch steps, careful on the uneven ground. Her leg always ached more in the mornings, though she did her best to hide the discomfort. "Miss Bennett." He nodded, then reached across to open the wagon door for her. She noted he had fitted the wagon with a series of clever adaptations that allowed him to manage with one arm, hooks and levers where standard handles would have required two hands. The ride out of town was quiet at first. Clara watched as the buildings of Pinewood Springs gave way to scattered homesteads, then to the untamed beauty of mountain meadows dotted with early spring wildflowers. Samuel's property lay about 3 miles from town, far enough to be isolated, but close enough to maintain connections when necessary. "Have you always lived in Colorado?" Clara asked, breaking the silence. Samuel glanced at her, then returned his attention to the road. "No, grew. Up in Ohio, came west after the war. To start fresh?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Something like that. Inherited the land from my grandmother, my mother's mother. Never met her, but she left me 40 acres and a cabin that was falling apart." He gestured with his chin toward a stand of pines ahead. "Put it back together piece by piece. Took 3 years." Clara tried to imagine it. A wounded soldier rebuilding a home one-handed in this wild country. The determination required humbled her. "That's remarkable." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Had plenty of time. Not much else to do. Out here. Except tend bees," Clara prompted, sensing there was more to his story than he was sharing. "Except that," he agreed. "Found a wild hive my first summer. Decided I'd rather work with creatures that don't care about my arm or my face. Just whether I'm gentle and consistent." They rounded a bend in the road, and Samuel's homestead came into view. Clara caught her breath. The cabin was larger than she'd expected, built of solid logs with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. Nearby stood several outbuildings, a barn, a workshop, and what must be the honey house where he processed his golden harvest. Behind the main cabin, white boxes dotted a sunny hillside, the beehives, she realized. Most surprising, though, was the garden. No simple vegetable patch. This was a thoughtfully designed space, with stone pathways winding between beds of herbs and early blooming flowers. It was beautiful, unexpected, and utterly at odds with the image of the gruff, solitary man beside her. "Your home is lovely," Clara said softly. Samuel's expression softened as he looked at his creation. "It serves." He guided the wagon to a stop near the porch. "The books are inside. Been meaning to build proper shelves for them, but haven't gotten around to it." Inside, the cabin revealed more surprises. Though humble, it was meticulously clean and organized. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, while windows let in abundant light. Samuel had built furniture suited to his needs, a desk with specialized tools within easy reach, Chairs, with armrests only on the right side, shelves at heights he could manage one-handed. And then there were the crates of books, dozens of them stacked against the far wall. My grandmother was apparently quite the collector, Samuel explained, seeing Clara's wide eyes. Most came with the property. Some I've added over the years. When traders come through. Clara approached the nearest crate and gently lifted out a leather-bound volume of Wordsworth's poems. "These are treasures," she murmured, running a finger along the gilded spine. "Useless if no one can find anything," Samuel replied practically. "I have shelves ready to put up in that room." He nodded toward a door off the main living area. "Thought it might make a proper library. If you could sort them while I work on getting the shelves installed." "Of course." Clara set down her lunch pail and removed her shawl. "Do you have a particular system in mind?" Samuel looked momentarily at a loss. Hadn't thought that far. "What would you suggest?" "Well, in a personal library, it's usually best to organize by subject first, then author." Clara tapped her chin, thoughtfully. "Literature, history, science, philosophy. How does that sound? Like you know what you're doing?" For the first time, a genuine smile transformed Samuel's face, softening the scar and bringing a light to his eyes that made Clara's breath catch. "I'll leave you to it then." The morning passed in peaceful industry. Clara carefully unpacked crates, examining each book for condition and content before creating neat stacks by subject. Many were classics: Shakespeare, Milton, Austen, Dickens, but there were also scientific treatises, histories, and volumes of poetry. She discovered books in French, German, and even a few in Greek, suggesting Samuel's grandmother had been a woman of considerable education. Occasionally, she would glance up to see Samuel working on mounting the shelves, his movements efficient despite his limitation. He had clearly adapted to his disability through determination and ingenuity. Once, he caught her watching and held her gaze for a moment before turning back to his task, a slight flush coloring his neck above his collar. By midday, Clara's back ached from bending over crates and her leg throbbed insistently. She straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back, and rolled her shoulders to ease the tension. "You should rest," Samuel said, setting down his hammer. "Take your lunch on the porch. View's better out there." Clara started to protest, but realized he was right. "Thank you. I could use a short break." The porch faced west, offering a spectacular view of the mountains rising in the distance. Clara settled on a bench, unwrapping Martha's lunch of bread, cheese, and an apple. The air was sweet with the scent of pine and early blooming flowers from Samuel's garden. In the distance, she could hear the gentle hum of the beehives. Samuel emerged from the cabin a few minutes later, carrying a jar of honey and his own simple lunch. He hesitated, then sat on the opposite end of the bench. "Try some," he said, offering the honey. "Good on the bread." Clara accepted the jar, dipping a corner of her bread into the amber liquid. The flavor that filled her mouth was complex and wonderful, floral but with hints of something wilder, like the mountains themselves distilled into sweetness. "This is remarkable," she said truthfully. "I've never tasted anything like it." Pride flickered across Samuel's face. Wildflower honey, different from what you'd get back east. The bees gather from the mountain flowers, columbine, lupine, fireweed. You love them, don't you? The bees. Samuel considered this, looking out toward the hives. They make sense to me. Colony works together. Every bee has a purpose. No matter if one has a damaged wing or is smaller than the others, still has work to do, still belongs. He glanced at her, then away. Not like people. The simple statement held volumes of pain and understanding. Clara felt a connection to this solitary man that both surprised and unsettled her. People can be cruel when faced with difference, she agreed quietly. They fear what they don't understand, or what reminds them how easily they could end up the same. Samuel's voice, was matter-of-fact without self-pity. One illness, one accident, one war, that's all it takes. They ate in silence for a while, the weight of shared understanding between them. Finally, Samuel asked, "How did it happen? Your leg?" The directness of the question startled Clara, though she found she didn't mind. Most people stared, but never asked, letting curiosity and assumptions fester. Polio when I was 8. I was fortunate. Many children don't survive or lose the use of both legs. She smoothed her skirt over her knee. My father insisted I continue my education, even when the local school balked at taking a crippled girl. He taught me himself, until they relented. Good man. He was. Clara felt the familiar ache of loss. He died 2 years ago. My mother followed 6 months later. I think she simply couldn't bear to be without him. Samuel nodded in understanding. My parents died when I was younger. Father in a farming accident when I was 12. Mother from pneumonia 4 years later. I'm sorry, he shrugged. Long time ago now. He gathered his lunch things and stood. We should get back to work if we're to make progress before the light fades. The afternoon continued much like the morning, with Clara sorting books and Samuel installing shelves. By late afternoon, they had made significant progress. The small room was transforming into a proper library, with sturdy shelves lining 2 walls and books beginning to fill them in orderly rows. Clara was reaching for another volume when the book slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor with a thud. She bent to retrieve it, her leg protesting the movement. As she straightened, a wave of dizziness swept over her, the room tilting alarmingly. Samuel was beside her instantly, his good arm steady at her elbow. You've overdone it, he said, concern darkening his eyes. I'm fine, Clara insisted, though the throbbing in her leg had intensified to a sharp pain that radiated up her hip. Just stood up too quickly. Sit. It was somewhere between a request and a command. He guided her to a chair, then disappeared into the main room, returning moments later with a cup of water. Drink. Clara sipped the cool water, embarrassed by her weakness. I apologize, Mr. Harper. I assure you this rarely happens. Samuel, he said unexpectedly. Pardon? My name. If we're to work together, seems foolish to stand on ceremony. He gestured toward her leg. Does it pain you often? Clara hesitated, then decided on honesty. More in damp weather, or after a long day. Usually I manage it well enough. Samuel, she couldn't quite think of him that way yet, nodded thoughtfully. I have something that might help, if you'd permit me. Curiosity overcame propriety. Yes, thank you. He left again, returning with a small tin. Inside was a salve that smelled of beeswax and herbs, camphor, arnica, and something woodsy she couldn't identify. My own mixture, he explained. Use it on my shoulder where the arm was taken. Helps with the phantom pains. Clara stared at the tin, then at Samuel. The offering felt intimate somehow, this sharing of a remedy born from his own suffering. I thank you. Apply it tonight. He replaced the lid and handed her the tin. You've done enough for today. I'll take you back to town before it gets dark. As they rode back toward Pinewood Springs, Clara found herself reluctant for the day to end. Despite her exhaustion and the discomfort in her leg, she had enjoyed the peaceful work, the magnificent surroundings, and most surprisingly, Samuel Harper's quiet company. Will you want me to return tomorrow? She asked as the town came into view. If you're able, he replied. There's still much to do. I'd like that. Clara's response was simple but sincere. Samuel glanced at her, his expression softening. As would I. The next morning dawned with ominous clouds gathering over the mountains. Martha frowned as she peered out the kitchen window. Storms brewing. Might be wise to stay in town today, Clara. Clara's heart sank. She had applied Samuel's salve the night before, and to her surprise, the relief had been significant. Her leg felt better than it had in weeks, and she'd been looking forward to returning to the library project. "Do you think it will hit before evening?" "Hard to say with mountain weather," Martha replied. "Could blow over, could be on us within hours." A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha opened it to find Samuel standing on the porch, hat in hand. "Mrs. Wilson?" He greeted her politely. "Miss Bennett, I've come to say our work will need to wait. Storms coming fast from the west." Clara couldn't hide her disappointment. "I see, of course, safety must come first." Samuel's eyes met hers, and she thought she saw a flicker of shared regret. Another time, Martha, watching the exchange with sharp eyes, cleared her throat. "Mr. Harper, since you've come all this way, would you care for some coffee before you head back?" Surprise crossed Samuel's face. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. That's kind of you." Martha bustled off to the kitchen, leaving them momentarily alone in the parlor. Clara found herself suddenly shy. "Your salve worked wonderfully," she said. "I'm most grateful. Glad to hear it." Samuel stood awkwardly, his hat still in his hand. "I enjoyed yesterday. Your company. Been a while since I had someone to talk with who doesn't stare at your arm instead of your face." "Clara," suggested gently. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Something like that." Before they could continue, a loud crash of thunder shook the house, followed immediately by the staccato drumming of heavy rain on the roof. Martha reappeared, coffee pot in hand. "Storms here already," she observed unnecessarily. "You'll not make it home before the worst hits, Mr. Harper. Best wait it out." The rain intensified, sheets of water cascading down the windows. Occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the rapidly darkening sky, followed by booming thunder that seemed to rattle the very foundations of the house. Samuel accepted a cup of coffee with a nod of thanks. "Appears I don't have much choice." Other boarders began to appear, drawn by the smell of coffee and the commotion of the storm. Clara found herself sitting next to Samuel on a small settee, as Martha's parlor filled with people seeking company during the tempest. Among them was the town's doctor, a white-haired man named Howard Mills, who eyed Samuel with poorly disguised curiosity. "Harper," he acknowledged. "Rare to see you in town 2 days running." "Circumstances," Samuel replied shortly. Dr. Mills turned his attention to Clara. "And you must be the young lady who was expecting to meet Edmund Walsh. News travels fast in small towns, I'm afraid." Clara lifted her chin. "Yes, though I find I'm not particularly disappointed by his absence, given what I've heard of his character since arriving." A ripple of surprised murmurs went through the room. One did not speak ill of established townspeople, especially when one was an outsider with a questionable reputation. Dr. Mills, however, merely chuckled. "Direct, aren't you? Refreshing." He studied her with shrewd eyes. "I understand you were a teacher back east." "Yes, for 5 years. I taught children from 6 to 14 in a small school outside Philadelphia." "Interesting." Dr. Mills stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Very interesting indeed." Before Clara could ask what he meant, a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Through the rain-lashed windows, they could see a wagon careening down the muddy street, the driver standing and shouting words, lost to the storm. Dr. Mills was on his feet instantly. "Something's happened." The front door burst open, and a drenched man stumbled in, water streaming from his clothes onto Martha's clean floor. "Cave-in at the Blackstone mine," he gasped. "At least 6 men trapped. Need help." The parlor erupted into activity. Dr. Mills began barking orders, gathering supplies from his bag. Men were pulling on coats, preparing to brave the storm to help with rescue efforts. Clara turned to find Samuel already standing, his face grim. "You're going?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Every hand is needed." He glanced down at his empty sleeve. "Even ones like mine." "Be careful," she said, surprising herself with the depth of concern in her voice. Samuel held her gaze for a moment. "I will." Then he was gone, striding out into the storm with the other men. Martha appeared at Clara's side, her face tight with worry. "It's bad business, mining accidents, especially in weather like this. Will they be able to help in this storm?" "They'll try," Martha sighed. "That's all anyone can do. Dr. Mills is good, but mining accidents..." She shook her head. "We should prepare. There will be injured coming back." Clara felt suddenly intensely helpless. "I want to help, please. What can I do?" Martha assessed her with sharp eyes. "Can you make bandages, boil water, keep a steady head with blood and broken bones?" "Yes. My father was often ill in his later years. I cared for him." "Good. That's a start. Come with me." The next hours were a blur of activity. Martha's boarding house became an impromptu hospital as the tiny doctor's office couldn't accommodate the anticipated casualties. Clara helped prepare beds, tear sheets into bandages, and boil water for sterilizing instruments. The first injured. Men arrived as the storm reached its peak, carried in on makeshift stretchers. Their faces were gray with coal dust and pain, their bodies broken by falling rock. Dr. Mills moved among them, assessing injuries and directing care. Clara found herself assisting an older woman named Beatrice with cleaning wounds and applying bandages. The work was difficult but necessary, and she welcomed the distraction from her worry about Samuel. "You've a gentle touch," Beatrice observed as Clara finished bandaging a miner's lacerated arm. "Steady, too." "Thank you. Clara broke off as a commotion at the door drew her attention. Samuel entered, supporting a young man who could barely stand. Both were drenched and covered in mud and coal dust. The younger man's face was contorted with pain, blood seeping through his trousers at the knee. Dr. Mills hurried over. "What happened?" "Beam fell," Samuel explained tersely. "Caught his leg. Think it's broken." "Bring him here," Clara called, indicating an empty cot she'd just prepared. Together, they helped the injured miner onto the cot. Up close, Clara could see he was hardly more than a boy, perhaps 17 or 18. "Miss Bennett," Samuel acknowledged her, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Didn't expect to find you in the thick of things. I couldn't sit idle, knowing men were hurt." She gestured to the young miner. "Do you know him?" "Tommy Winters. Works the day shift usually, but they called in everyone when the night crew got trapped." Dr. Mills joined them, examining Tommy's leg with practiced hands. The boy bit back a cry of pain. "Definitely broken," the doctor confirmed. "Clean, though. Should heal well if set properly." He glanced at Clara. "I need to set this leg. Are your hands steady enough to help?" Clara nodded, pushing aside her own discomfort. "Tell me what to do." "Hold his shoulders. Keep him still." Dr. Mills positioned himself at Tommy's leg. "Harper, hold his other leg down. This won't be pleasant." Samuel moved into position, his one hand firm on Tommy's uninjured leg. Clara leaned over the boy, using her weight to keep his upper body from thrashing as Dr. Mills manipulated the broken bone back into alignment. Tommy's scream cut through the bustle of the makeshift hospital. Clara spoke softly to him, soothing words she would have used with frightened children in her classroom. Gradually, his rigid body relaxed slightly as the worst pain passed. "Well, done," Dr. Mills said, giving Clara an appraising look as he began splinting the leg. "You've a steadier nerve than most." Once Tommy was settled, Clara straightened, suddenly aware of how close she had been standing to Samuel. Their eyes met over the cot, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding of pain and endurance. "Are you all right?" she asked, noticing for the first time a gash on his forehead that was slowly seeping blood. Samuel touched it absently. "It's nothing. Others need more help. It needs cleaning at least." Clara dipped a cloth in clean water. "Please sit down before you fall down." To her surprise, he complied, sinking onto a chair as weariness overtook him. Clara gently cleaned the cut, aware of his eyes on her face as she worked. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" Someone who would run from blood and broken bones. Someone who would be too concerned with propriety to get her hands dirty. Clara smiled slightly. Disappointment, just the opposite. His voice was soft enough that only she could hear. "You're something rare, Clara Bennett." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. Before she could respond, Dr. Mills approached again. "Harper, you're needed back at the mine if you're able. They're breaking through to the trapped men, and they need every strong back they can get." Samuel stood immediately. "I'll go." "Your head," Clara began. "Will keep," he finished. "Men's lives won't." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you for this." He gestured to his forehead, then more broadly to the room of injured miners she was helping to tend. "For all of it." Then he was gone again, back into the storm and the darkness, leaving Clara with a strange mixture of admiration and fear for his safety churning in her chest. The night wore on, a seemingly endless procession of injured men, worried families, and moments of both tragedy and triumph. 3 miners had died in the cave-in, but the rescue party managed to reach the trapped men before lack of air claimed more lives. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a crisp, clear morning in its wake. Clara stood on the boarding house porch, exhausted but unable to rest. Her body ached, her leg throbbed insistently, and dried blood still stained her sleeves where she had helped tend the wounded. She had not seen Samuel since he left to return to the mine. The waiting and uncertainty gnawed at her, a worry that seemed disproportionate given their brief acquaintance. Yet she could not deny the connection she felt to him, a man who understood what it meant to be seen as less than whole, yet who had proved his worth beyond question during the crisis. A movement down the street caught her attention. Samuel's tall figure appeared, walking slowly toward the boarding house. Even from a distance, she could see the slump of his shoulders, the weariness in his gait. Without thinking, Clara descended the steps and moved to meet him, her own fatigue forgotten. As they drew closer, she could see the extent of his exhaustion. His face was gray with coal dust and strain, his clothes torn and muddy. But he was alive and walking, and relief flooded through her with an intensity that should have been alarming. "You should be resting," Clara said, taking in Samuel's exhausted appearance. His lips curved in a faint smile. "So should you." They stood in the middle of the street, morning sunlight illuminating the devastation left by the storm and the night's desperate events. Mud and debris littered the thoroughfare, and in the distance, figures still moved around the mine entrance where families waited for news of loved ones. "Is it over?" Clara asked. "Did they reach everyone?" Samuel nodded wearily. "All accounted for. 3 dead, 14 injured, 4 still missing but presumed." He didn't finish the sentence, but Clara understood. Some men would remain entombed in the earth, their bodies too dangerous to recover. "You need food and rest," she said, gently touching his arm. The casual contact would have been unthinkable days ago, but the night's shared ordeal had shifted something fundamental between them. "Come, Mrs. Wilson has breakfast for everyone who helped." Samuel looked as though he might refuse, then nodded, too tired to argue. Clara guided him back to the boarding house, where Martha was serving strong coffee and hot biscuits to the rescue workers. The parlor, still functioning as a makeshift hospital, held the most seriously injured miners. Others had been taken to their homes or to relatives in town. Samuel sank into a chair at the kitchen table, accepting a mug of coffee with a murmured thanks. Clara brought him a plate of food, then sat across from him with her own breakfast. They ate in companionable silence, both too exhausted for conversation. Dr. Mills entered, looking as weary as everyone else, but with a lightness in his step that suggested satisfaction with the night's work. He nodded to Clara, then turned to Samuel. "Harper, the town owes you a debt. Without your knowledge of supporting structures, we might have lost more men in the rescue attempt." Samuel shook his head. "I did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Dr. Mills countered. "Not everyone has the skill to shore up a collapsing mineshaft one-handed, or the courage to go back in when the supports were creaking." He clapped Samuel on the shoulder. "You're a credit to this town, whether they know it or not." After the doctor moved on, Clara studied Samuel with new appreciation. "You didn't mention you had mining experience." Samuel stared into his coffee. "Worked the silver mines in Nevada for a time after the war. Before the bees. Learned about tunnel supports the hard way." Clara sensed there was more to the story, but his expression warned against pressing further. Instead, she said, "You should take one of the empty beds upstairs. It's not safe for you to travel home in this state." "I need to get back to the hives," Samuel protested, though he could barely keep his eyes open. "Surely the bees can manage one day without you," Clara said gently. "You're no use to them if you fall asleep on the road and break your neck." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "You make a convincing argument, school teacher." Martha, overhearing, bustled over. "Of course you'll stay, Mr. Harper. I've already made up the room at the end of the hall, the least we can do after what you've done for our town." Samuel looked between the two women and surrendered with a nod. "Just for a few hours." After breakfast, Clara showed him to the small room Martha had prepared. He paused at the doorway, suddenly awkward. "Thank you, Miss Bennett, for your help last night and—" He gestured vaguely, as if unable to articulate the rest. "Clara," she said, "if we're using first names now." His eyes met hers, softening, despite his exhaustion. "Clara," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Thank you." She left him to rest and returned downstairs to help with the remaining patients. Her own fatigue pressed down on her, but there was still work to be done. Tommy Winters, the young miner with the broken leg, was awake and in pain. Clara sat with him, offering sips of water and distracting him with stories from her teaching days until Dr. Mills could return with more laudanum for the pain. "You're good with him," the doctor observed as he administered the medicine. "Have a way of calming people." "Children aren't so different from adults when they're hurting," Clara replied. "Everyone needs reassurance." Dr. Mills studied her thoughtfully. "Miss Bennett, I wonder if you might consider something. Our school situation here is less than ideal. Mr. Peterson rules through fear rather than inspiration. Children are falling behind. Parents are unhappy." Clara's heart quickened. "Are you suggesting—" "The town council meets tomorrow evening. I sit on it, as does Mrs. Wilson. If you were interested in presenting yourself as an alternative—" Hope bloomed cautiously in Clara's chest. A teaching position would solve so many problems: steady income, a purpose, a reason to stay in Pinewood Springs that had nothing to do with being left at the station or rescued by a one-armed beekeeper. "I would be very interested," she said, firmly, "though I'm not sure how the council would view hiring a woman with my limitations." Dr. Mills smiled. "After last night, I think you've proven your capabilities extend far beyond any physical limitation. And if the council hesitates, I suspect they'll find themselves facing opposition from unexpected quarters." His gaze drifted toward the stairs, where Samuel was resting. The following evening found Clara waiting nervously outside the town hall where the council meeting was taking place. She had spent the day preparing, writing out her qualifications and teaching philosophy, and gathering references from her previous position that she had fortunately brought with her. She wore her best dress, the blue one she'd arrived in, now freshly washed and pressed, and had styled her hair carefully. Her leg ached from standing, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. If she was to convince the council to take a chance on her, she needed to project confidence and capability. Mrs. Wilson emerged from the building, her expression carefully neutral. "They're ready for you now, Clara." Inside, 5 council members sat at a long table, their faces illuminated by lamplight. Clara recognized Dr. Mills and Martha, but the others were strangers to her. A heavy-set man with a prosperous look about him, likely the owner of the mercantile. A stern-faced woman in her 50s, whose severe bun reminded Clara of her first teaching supervisor. And a balding man with spectacles, who was clearly the mayor, judging by his central position. "Miss Bennett," the mayor began, "we understand. You wish to propose yourself as a candidate for the teaching position in Pinewood Springs." "Yes, sir," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nerves. "I have 5 years of experience teaching children of all ages in Pennsylvania and excellent references from my previous school board." She handed over the papers she had prepared. The council members passed the documents between them, murmuring as they read. The stern woman, introduced as Mrs. Harding, the minister's wife, looked up with narrowed eyes. "It says here you left your previous position due to family obligations. What were those obligations precisely?" Clara swallowed hard. "My father fell ill. As I had no siblings and my mother was already in poor health, I resigned my position to care for them. And now that they have passed, you thought to seek employment out west as a mail-order bride rather than returning to teaching." Mrs. Harding's tone made the question an accusation. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "My parents' medical bills left me with few resources. The school had already hired my replacement. I believed marriage offered security I could not find elsewhere. And now that marriage prospect has fallen through," the mercantile owner, Mr. Griggs, noted. "How do we know you won't leave when another opportunity arises?" Clara lifted her chin. "I came to Colorado seeking a fresh start and a place to belong. Teaching has always been my true calling. If given this opportunity, I would be committed to the children of Pinewood Springs for as long as the position was mine to hold." Dr. Mills cleared his throat. Miss Bennett proved her dedication and level-headedness during the mine disaster. She assisted me with injuries that would make most untrained individuals faint and showed particular skill in calming the younger miners. "That's as may be," Mrs. Harding sniffed, "but there is still the matter of her condition." She glanced pointedly at Clara's leg. "Teaching requires one to be on one's feet for hours. Can you manage such demands, Miss Bennett?" The question struck at Clara's deepest insecurity, but she refused to falter. "I taught for 5 years with this same limitation, Mrs. Harding. Children respond to knowledge, patience, and genuine care, none of which are impeded by a limp. In fact, I have found that my own challenges have made me more attuned to the different ways children learn and overcome their own obstacles." The mayor adjusted his spectacles. "What of discipline? Mr. Peterson maintains that firm punishment is necessary to keep order. Do you agree?" Clara chose her words carefully. "I believe structure and clear expectations are essential in a classroom. However, I have found that respect and engaging instruction prevent most disciplinary issues before they arise. When correction is needed, I prefer methods that preserve dignity while reinforcing proper behavior." The council members exchanged glances, and Clara sensed skepticism from at least Mrs. Harding and Mr. Griggs. Martha and Dr. Mills seemed supportive, but they were only 2 of 5 votes. The door at the back of the hall opened, and Clara turned to see Samuel enter quietly. He had returned to his homestead that morning, but had apparently come back to town for the meeting. He nodded to her, then took a seat in the back row, his presence somehow bolstering her confidence. "Miss Bennett," the mayor said, This is a serious decision that affects the futures of all the children in our community. We will need to deliberate. Please wait outside, and we will call you when we have reached a conclusion." Clara nodded and stepped out into the cool evening air. Samuel followed a moment later, coming to stand beside her on the boardwalk. "You didn't have to come," she said, touched by his support. "Wanted to." His voice was gruff, but his eyes were kind. "How did it go?" "I'm not sure. Mrs. Harding seems determined to find me unsuitable." Samuel leaned against the railing. "Agnes Harding objects to most things on principle, especially new ideas or people who might disrupt her vision of proper society." Clara smiled despite her nerves. "You seem to know the town dynamics well for someone who avoids town whenever possible. Small communities have long memories and loud voices that carry to even remote homesteads." He studied her face in the lamplight, spilling from the town hall windows. "You'd be good for the children here." "Thank you," Clara said softly. "That means more than you know." They fell into companionable silence, waiting as the minutes stretched on. Finally, the door opened, and Martha beckoned them inside. The council. Members sat in the same positions, their expressions revealing nothing. Clara stood before them, hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. Samuel remained by the door, a silent but reassuring presence. The mayor cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, we have discussed your application thoroughly. There were differing opinions on the council." Clara's heart sank. That did not sound promising. "However," he continued, "we have reached a decision. We are prepared to offer you a trial period of 1 month as teacher of the Pinewood Springs school, after which the council will evaluate your performance and make a permanent decision." Relief swept through Clara so intensely she nearly swayed on her feet. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. I am deeply grateful for this opportunity and will work diligently to prove your confidence in me is not misplaced." "There are conditions," Mrs. Harding interjected sharply. "First, your living arrangements must be above reproach. As a single woman teaching our children, your moral character must be unimpeachable." "I understand completely," Clara assured her. "I will continue to board with Mrs. Wilson." "Second," Mrs. Harding continued, "Mr. Peterson has agreed to remain for the trial period to observe and assist if needed. You will be expected to work harmoniously with him during this transition." This was a less welcome condition, but Clara nodded her agreement. "Of course." "And finally," Mr. Griggs added, "there is the matter of your association with Mr. Harper." Clara tensed, glancing towards Samuel, who had straightened from his position by the door. "What about it?" Samuel asked, his voice deceptively calm. Mr. Griggs shifted uncomfortably. "There has been talk about Miss Bennett's visits to your homestead. While we understand there were practical reasons and Mrs. Wilson has vouched for Miss Bennett's character, the appearance of impropriety could undermine her position as teacher." "I assure you, Mr. Griggs, my conduct has been entirely proper," Clara said firmly. "Mr. Harper kindly offered me employment cataloguing his library when no one else in town would give me work." "Nevertheless," Mrs. Harding cut in, "a young, unmarried woman spending time alone with a bachelor, regardless of the reason, invites gossip. As teacher, you must be above such gossip." Samuel stepped forward. "So you're saying Clara cannot continue working at my place because people might talk?" "Precisely," Mrs. Harding said with a thin smile. "I'm glad you understand. Then I have a simple solution." Samuel moved to stand beside Clara, his expression resolute. "We'll marry." 5 pairs of eyes widened in shock, none more so than Clara's, as she turned to stare at Samuel. "Mr. Harper," the mayor sputtered, "this is highly irregular." "Is it?" Samuel's gaze never left Clara's face. "Miss Bennett came to Pinewood Springs expecting marriage. I find I'm in need of a wife. It solves both her problem and the council's concern about propriety." Clara could barely breathe. Was this a proposal, or merely a practical solution to satisfy the council? Samuel's expression gave away nothing beyond calm determination. "Miss Bennett," Martha said gently, "do you have a response to Mr. Harper's suggestion?" Clara searched Samuel's face, looking for any sign that this was more than expedience. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly as they met hers, and she saw something there. Not love, perhaps, but possibility, respect, maybe even hope. Clara gathered her courage. "I would need to discuss this with Mr. Harper privately before giving an answer." "Of course," the mayor agreed, looking relieved at the opportunity to postpone this unexpected development. "We will adjourn for now. Miss Bennett, regardless of your decision regarding Mr. Harper's proposal, the teaching position is yours on a trial basis beginning next Monday." Outside, the night had deepened, stars appearing in the clear sky overhead. Clara and Samuel walked in silence toward the boarding house, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the porch steps, Clara finally turned to face him. "Did you mean it?" she asked softly. "Or was it merely a solution to satisfy the council?" Samuel looked up at the stars for a long moment before meeting her gaze. "I meant it. Not how I would have chosen to ask, but—" He took a deep breath. "I respect you, Clara, more than any woman I've known, maybe more than anyone since the war. I think we could build something good together." "It's not love," Clara noted, needing honesty between them. "No," Samuel agreed, "not yet. But I've seen marriages built on less that grew into something real." He hesitated, then added, "I wouldn't expect, that is, we could have separate rooms, at least until—" Clara felt her cheeks warm at the implication. "I appreciate your consideration." She studied his face in the moonlight, this scarred, solitary man who had shown her more kindness than anyone in Pinewood Springs. "I need time to think, Samuel." He nodded, unsurprised. "Of course. It's a big decision." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Clara." "Good night." Clara watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Inside, she found Martha waiting in the kitchen, a pot of tea steaming on the stove. "Thought you might need this," Martha said, pouring a cup and pushing it toward Clara. That was quite a development at the meeting. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I don't know what to do, Martha. It's all happening so fast." Martha sat across from her, her kind eyes assessing. "Samuel Harper is a good man. Wounded in body, perhaps, but not in character, not in the ways that matter." "I know that," Clara said softly. "I'm not concerned about his character or his injuries, but marriage should be more than convenience, shouldn't it?" "Ideally, yes." Martha sipped her tea thoughtfully. "But many begin as arrangements and grow into love. My Henry and I were matched by our parents, couldn't stand each other at first." A fond smile curved her lips at the memory. 60 years we had together, and I never loved anyone more." Clara considered this. "I was supposed to marry Edmund Walsh without knowing him at all. At least I know something of Samuel's character and manner." "And he knows yours," Martha pointed out. "He's seen you at your strongest, helping during the crisis, and at your most vulnerable when your leg pains you. There are married couples who never achieve that level of understanding." Clara stared into her tea, weighing options and possibilities. Samuel offered security, respect, and perhaps in time, deeper affection. The teaching position gave her purpose and independence, but the council's conditions made clear that her position remained precarious without the protection of marriage. "I don't want to be forced into marriage again," she said finally. "Even by circumstances rather than a person." Martha reached across the table to pat her hand. "Then don't be. Make your choice because it's what you want, not what others expect. She rose, gathering the empty cups. Sleep on it. Decisions made in haste are rarely the best ones. Clara did sleep, though fitfully. Dreams of schoolrooms and beehives. Mine. Collapses and wedding rings tangled in her mind until dawn lightened the sky outside her window. She rose early, washed and dressed, and made a decision. She would visit Samuel at his homestead one more time, see the place in daylight, untainted by exhaustion or emergency. She would finish the library project they had started, and in the process determine if this was truly a home where she could envision a future. Martha raised an eyebrow when Clara announced her intentions at breakfast, but made no comment beyond, offering to pack a lunch. By mid-morning, Clara was walking the road to Samuel's property, having arranged for a neighbor's son to drive her in his cart. The boy, one of her future students, she realized, left her at the entrance to Samuel's drive with a promise to return at sunset. Clara walked the remainder of the way, taking in the beauty of the mountain homestead in the clear spring light. Samuel was in the garden when she arrived, kneeling among the herb beds, his one hand deftly cultivating the soil around young plants. He looked up, surprise evident on his face as she approached. "Clara." He stood, brushing dirt from his trousers. "I didn't expect. I wanted to finish what we started," she said simply. "The library still needs organizing, doesn't it?" Understanding dawned in his eyes. "It does." They worked together through the morning, sorting the remaining books and arranging them on the shelves Samuel had installed. The small room was transformed, becoming a cozy library that reminded Clara of her father's study back in Pennsylvania. Afternoon found them on the porch, sharing the lunch Martha had packed, the conversation flowing easily between them. "I've been offered the teaching position," Clara said as they finished eating. Samuel smiled, genuine pleasure lighting his features. "Good. The children will benefit from your approach." "There were conditions," she continued. "One being that I cannot continue visiting your homestead unchaperoned." His expression sobered. "I remember." "Is that why you offered marriage? To satisfy the council's conditions about propriety?" Samuel set down his coffee cup, considering his words carefully. "Partly," he admitted, "but not entirely. I've been alone a long time, Clara, by choice mostly. After the war, I couldn't bear the way people looked at me, with pity or disgust or fear. Easier to keep to myself, tend my bees, build something that was mine alone." He looked out over the garden and the sloping meadow beyond, where the beehives stood in neat rows. "But since you arrived, I've started to see this place differently, to wonder if it might be better shared." Clara's heart quickened at the simple honesty in his words. "I don't know if I can be a proper wife, Samuel. My leg has nothing to do with what makes a good wife." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "You're strong, Clara, stronger than most whole-bodied people I've known. You're kind without being sentimental, practical without being cold. I admire that. And if I need more than admiration?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, but she didn't regret the honesty. Samuel's expression softened. "Then we'd work toward that day by day. I can't promise feelings I don't yet have, but I can promise to try, to be open to whatever grows between us." Clara nodded, appreciating his candor. "I should see the rest of the homestead, I think, if I'm to consider making it my home." Samuel showed her everything. The workshop where he crafted his beekeeping equipment, the honey house with its extraction equipment and storage shelves, the cool cellar where preserves and root vegetables lasted through winter. Every space reflected his methodical nature and practical adaptations for one-handed work. Last, they visited the beehives. Samuel provided Clara with a veil, though he wore none himself, explaining that the bees knew him and rarely stung unless threatened. She watched in fascination as he opened a hive, showing her the frames heavy with honey and the organized society within. "The queen is there," he pointed out, indicating a larger bee surrounded by attendants. "Everything revolves around her. The workers, the drones, all with different roles but working toward the same purpose." "A well-ordered classroom functions similarly," Clara observed, seeing parallels to her own domain. "Different children with different strengths, but all part of a whole." Samuel glanced at her, a smile touching his lips. "We're not so different, you and I. We both create order from chaos in our own ways." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the meadow, Clara found herself reluctant to leave. This place had a peace about it that called to something deep within her, a sense of rightness, of possibility. "I should get back to town," she said finally. "I promised Martha I wouldn't stay late." Samuel nodded, escorting her down the drive to meet her young driver, who was already waiting with his cart. Before she climbed aboard, Clara turned to Samuel. "I've made my decision," she said quietly, "about your proposal." His expression remained calm, though she saw a flicker of tension in his jaw. "And?" "Yes." The word was simple, but carried the weight of a future being reshaped. "I will marry you, Samuel Harper." Relief and something warmer spread across his features. "You're sure?" Clara nodded. "I came west seeking security and a fresh start. I think I can find both with you, along with respect and honest partnership. That's a stronger foundation than many marriages begin with." Samuel took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "We'll make it work, Clara, together." The wedding took place the following Saturday in the small church on the edge of town. Unlike the elaborate ceremony Clara had once envisioned, when corresponding with Edmund Walsh, this was a simple affair. Martha had helped her refashion her blue dress with some lace trim, and Samuel wore a clean suit that looked rarely used but well maintained. The congregation was sparse. Martha and Dr. Mills, a few of the miners Samuel had helped rescue, and several curious townspeople drawn more by gossip than goodwill. Mrs. Harding sat in the front pew, her expression suggesting she was attending, more to ensure the propriety she had demanded than to celebrate the union. As Clara stood beside Samuel before the minister, she felt strangely calm. This was not the romance she had dreamed of as a girl, but it was a choice made with clear eyes and open heart. When Samuel's steady voice spoke the vows, she heard in them not passion, but something perhaps more valuable, a promise of faithful partnership, of respect and consideration. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister intoned. "You may kiss the bride." Samuel hesitated, his eyes meeting Clara's in silent question. She gave a small nod, and he leaned forward to place a gentle, brief kiss on her lips, their first physical expression of affection. It was chaste, but not cold, and Clara found herself wondering what deeper feelings might develop between them. With time, the journey to Samuel's homestead, now their homestead, was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts as the wagon rattled along the familiar road. Clara watched the town recede behind them, aware that she was leaving behind not only the boarding house and Martha's motherly presence, but also her last connection to the life she had expected to find in Pinewood Springs. When they arrived, Samuel helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady and warm against hers. "Welcome home," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than their brevity suggested. Clara stood for a moment, taking in the cabin with new eyes, not as a visitor, but as its mistress. Sunlight glinted off the windows, and the garden beds were bright with early blooms. In the distance, the soft hum of bees at work provided a peaceful backdrop to the mountain silence. "It's beautiful," she said truthfully. Samuel carried her trunk inside, placing it in the bedroom, a room Clara had not seen during her previous visits. It was simply furnished with a broad bed, a chest of drawers, and a rocking chair by the window. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, and a colorful quilt covered the bed. "Martha helped," Samuel explained, seeing her surprised expression. Said every new home needs a proper quilt. Clara ran her fingers over the intricate stitching, touched by the gesture. "It's lovely." An awkward silence fell between them. Despite the wedding ceremony and the legal reality of their marriage, they remained in many ways strangers to each other, bound by mutual respect and practical necessity rather than the intimacy typically associated with marriage. Samuel cleared his throat. "I've prepared the small room off the kitchen as well," he said. "Thought you might want your own space, at least at first, for reading or whatever you prefer." The consideration in this gesture brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. "Thank you," she managed, blinking them away. "That's very thoughtful." "I'll see to the wagon and the horse," Samuel said, clearly sensing her need for a moment alone. "Take your time settling in." When the door closed, behind him, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, the enormity of her situation finally hitting her. She was married, not to the prosperous shopkeeper she had traveled west to meet, but to a scarred beekeeper with one arm who lived miles from town. A man she respected and perhaps was beginning to care for, but did not love. Not yet. With a deep breath, she rose and began unpacking her meager belongings, the few dresses she owned, her books, the small keepsakes from her parents that had survived the journey west. As she worked, she found herself arranging things with care, wanting to blend her possessions seamlessly with Samuel's without overwhelming his space. In the kitchen, she found evidence of Samuel's preparations, fresh supplies from town, a new kettle, cups and plates that looked recently purchased rather than long used. He had made an effort to ready his home for a wife, despite the hasty nature of their arrangement. By the time Samuel returned, Clara had unpacked her trunk and started preparing a simple supper from the supplies in the pantry. He paused in the doorway, watching her move about the kitchen with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You didn't have to cook tonight," he said. "Must be tired from everything." Clara smiled. "I wanted to. It feels good to be useful." She hesitated, then added, "Besides, we need to eat, and I suspect your cooking skills are limited to bachelor fare." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Coffee, beans, and whatever I can shoot or trap. Not exactly suitable for a schoolteacher's palate." The mention of her new position reminded Clara of the responsibilities awaiting her on Monday. "I'll need to prepare lessons tomorrow for my first day of teaching," she said, setting plates on the table. "Would it be possible to use some paper? From your supplies?" "Of course. What's mine is yours now." Samuel sat at the table, his movements slightly stiff, as though uncertain of his place in this new arrangement. "Everything in the library is at your disposal as well. Might be some books there that would help." They ate together, the conversation halting at first but gradually easing into more comfortable exchanges. Clara described her teaching experiences in Pennsylvania, and Samuel spoke of his beekeeping plans for the season ahead. It was the talk of colleagues more than newlyweds, but it felt right for where they stood with each other. After supper, Clara insisted on washing the dishes despite Samuel's protests. As she worked, he brought in more firewood, stacking it neatly by the stove. The domestic rhythm felt strange, yet oddly comforting. Two people moving around each other, establishing patterns that would shape their shared life. When the kitchen was clean and the fire banked for the night, the inevitable moment could no longer be postponed. Clara stood awkwardly by the table, uncertain what came next in this unusual marriage. Samuel seemed to sense her discomfort. "It's been a long day," he said gently. "You should rest. The bedroom is yours." Clara blinked in surprise. "Where will you sleep?" "I've made up a bed in my workshop for now." Seeing her expression, he added quickly, "It's comfortable enough. I've slept there many times when working late." "But it's your bed," Clara protested. "Your home. I don't want to displace you." Samuel shook his head. "Our home now. And I meant what I said before the wedding. I don't expect... That is, I want you to feel comfortable here, safe." The implication was clear. Though legally her husband, Samuel, was offering her space and time to adjust before claiming any marital rights. The consideration in this gesture touched Clara deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I can't take your bed while you sleep. In a workshop. Perhaps we could share the room, even if we don't share the bed just yet. I could make up a pallet on the floor, or..." "I'll not have my wife sleeping on the floor," Samuel interrupted firmly. "Let me make a proposal. I'll bring in the cot from the workshop for now. It can fit in the corner of the bedroom. That way neither of us is exiled, but you still have your privacy." Clara considered this, then nodded. "That seems a fair arrangement. For now." The "for now" hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement that this was temporary, that someday their relationship might evolve into something more traditional. But neither was ready to address that possibility directly. As promised, Samuel brought in the cot and set it up in the corner of the bedroom, at a respectable distance from the main bed. He gathered his nightclothes and left Clara alone to prepare for bed, returning only after she called that she was settled. In the darkness, Clara lay listening to Samuel's steady breathing across the room. Strange to think that this man was her husband, that their lives were now intertwined by law and circumstance. Yet there was comfort in his presence, in knowing she was not alone in this vast wilderness. "Samuel," she whispered, uncertain if he was still awake. "Yes?" His voice came immediately, suggesting he too had been lying awake. "Thank you for all of this. I know it wasn't what either of us planned, but I'm grateful." A pause, then, "So am I. Clara, good night." "Good night." Monday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Clara rose early, dressed with care in her most professional-looking dress, and pinned her hair in a neat bun suitable for a schoolteacher. Samuel was already up, having prepared coffee and a simple breakfast of porridge and honey from his hives. "Nervous?" he asked, noting the way she barely touched her food. Clara managed a smile. "A little. First impressions matter, especially with children." "They'll like you," Samuel said with quiet confidence. "Children recognize genuine care when they see it." His faith in her abilities warmed Clara more than the coffee. "I hope so, especially with Mr. Peterson watching my every move, looking for reasons to declare me unsuitable." Samuel's jaw tightened at the mention of the former teacher. "Don't let him intimidate you. You know your worth as a teacher." After breakfast, Samuel drove her to town in the wagon, the early morning light gilding the mountain landscape. As they approached the schoolhouse, a simple wooden building with a bell tower at one end, Clara caught sight of children already gathered in the yard, their curious faces turning toward the approaching wagon. "Would you like me to come in with you?" Samuel asked as he drew the wagon to a stop. Clara considered this, then shook her head. "I think I need to establish myself on my own terms from the beginning." She squeezed his hand briefly. "But thank you for offering. I'll be back at 4 to collect you," he said. "Good luck, schoolteacher." Clara descended from the wagon, smoothing her skirts and lifting her chin. The children watched her approach with undisguised curiosity, whispering among themselves. She counted about 20 of them, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 14 or 15. "Good morning," she greeted them warmly. "I'm Mrs. Harper, your new teacher." A small girl with blonde braids stepped forward. "Are you really gonna be our teacher now instead of Mr. Peterson?" "For a trial period, yes," Clara confirmed. "And what's your name?" "Lily," the girl replied. "Lily Taylor. My pa works at the mine." "I'm pleased to meet you, Lily." Clara looked around at the other children. "I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you." The schoolhouse door opened, and Mr. Peterson emerged. A thin, sour-faced man with a ruler clutched in one hand like a weapon. His eyes narrowed as he took in Clara and the watching children. "Mrs. Harper," he said, her married name sounding like an accusation on his lips. "I see you've arrived. The children should be inside preparing for lessons, not dawdling in the yard." He rapped the ruler sharply against the doorframe, making several children flinch. "Inside, all of you, now!" The children scurried to obey, filing past Clara with wary glances. She followed them into the schoolhouse, taking in the dimly lit room with its rows of scarred desks facing a larger teacher's desk at the front. The walls were bare, except for a faded map of the United States and a chalkboard covered with lines of multiplication tables in a severe hand. Mr. Peterson positioned himself behind the teacher's desk, clearly unwilling to surrender his territory. "The council has instructed me to observe your methods and assist in the transition," he informed Clara. "I will be evaluating your ability to maintain discipline and properly instruct the children according to established standards." Clara smiled pleasantly, refusing to be intimidated. "I appreciate your experience, Mr. Peterson. I'm sure we can learn from each other during this transition period." His thin lips pressed into an even thinner line at this suggestion of mutual learning. "You may begin by checking the children's arithmetic assignments from Friday. They were to complete 50 problems each. Those who fail to produce correct work should receive appropriate consequences." Clara turned to the waiting children, who sat rigidly at their desks, eyes downcast. "Good morning, class," she began warmly. "Before we check your arithmetic, I'd like to learn your names and a little about each of you. Let's go around the room and introduce ourselves." Mr. Peterson made a disapproving noise, but Clara continued as though she hadn't heard. One by one, the children stated their names, ages, and a fact about themselves at Clara's gentle prompting. As they spoke, she noted their varying levels of confidence. The fear some showed when glancing at Mr. Peterson, and the tentative hope in a few faces. When the introductions were complete, Clara moved to the chalkboard. "Now, let's review those arithmetic problems together. Who can tell me the answer to the first one?" Several hands shot up, always the same few children, she noticed. The others sat frozen, clearly afraid of giving a wrong answer. "Sarah!" Clara called on a thin girl in the back who hadn't raised her hand. "Would you try the first one?" The girl's eyes widened in alarm. I don't know, ma'am." Mr. Peterson stepped forward. "Sarah consistently fails to apply herself. Perhaps a demonstration of consequences would be appropriate." He held out his ruler meaningfully. Clara intercepted, smoothly. "I'd prefer to understand the difficulty first, Mr. Peterson. Sarah, could you show me how you attempted to solve the problem?" Reluctantly, Sarah opened her slate, revealing smudged figures and crossed-out attempts. Clara examined them thoughtfully. "I see where the confusion lies. You're struggling with carrying the tens place." She turned to the class. "Let's review this concept together. Sometimes we need to see things differently to understand them properly." Using apples from her lunch as visual aids, Clara demonstrated the concept of regrouping. In addition, the children watched with growing interest, several nodding as understanding dawned. Even Sarah ventured a small smile when she successfully solved the next problem under Clara's guidance. Mr. Peterson observed with thinly veiled disapproval, making notes in a small book. But Clara refused to be deterred. Throughout the morning, she began subtly reshaping the classroom dynamic, encouraging questions, praising effort as well as correct answers, and introducing elements of her teaching philosophy within the existing lesson structure. By lunchtime, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Children who had sat rigid with fear were beginning to relax, while those who had dominated with correct answers were learning to give others a chance to speak. Only Mr. Peterson remained unchanged, his disapproving presence a shadow at the edge. of Clara's awareness. When the children filed out for their midday break, he approached her desk. "Your methods lack proper discipline, Mrs. Harper. Children require firm boundaries and swift correction. This coddling will only encourage laziness and disrespect." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I believe children learn best in an environment where they feel safe to make mistakes and ask questions, Mr. Peterson. Fear may produce compliance, but it rarely leads to true understanding or love of learning." "Pretty theories from Eastern schoolrooms," he scoffed. "These are frontier children. Many will work the mines or tend farms. They need practical skills and proper respect for authority, not coddling. Especially those destined for difficult lives deserve to experience kindness and encouragement in their schooling," Clara countered. "And practical skills are better retained when understood, not merely memorized under threat of punishment." Mr. Peterson's face reddened. "The council will hear of your insubordination. I doubt your trial period will last the week," Clara smiled politely. "I welcome their observation of the children's progress. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should prepare for the afternoon lessons." The remainder of the day continued in similar fashion, Clara gradually implementing her teaching methods, while Mr. Peterson scowled and made notes. By the time the final bell rang, she was exhausted, but satisfied. Several children had smiled at her as they left, and young Lily had even placed a small wildflower on her desk before hurrying away. Samuel was waiting outside as promised, his wagon parked beneath a large cottonwood tree. As Clara approached, she saw concern in his expression. "Rough day?" he asked, helping her into the wagon. "Challenging," she corrected, settling beside him. "Mr. Peterson is resistant to new methods." Samuel's mouth quirked. "Imagine that." As they drove home, Clara recounted her day, describing the children and her small victories in beginning to reach them. Samuel listened attentively, occasionally asking questions or offering observations that suggested he understood more about teaching than she might have expected. "You seem knowledgeable about education," she noted as they neared the homestead. Samuel shrugged. "My mother was a teacher before she married, used to talk about her students and methods. Some of it stuck, I suppose." This glimpse into his past intrigued Clara. Samuel rarely spoke of his life before Colorado, particularly his childhood and family. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. A shadow crossed his face. "Would have liked you, I think." The simple statement, offered without elaboration, touched Clara deeply. It felt like a gift, this small connection to the family Samuel had lost long ago. The days fell into a rhythm as spring deepened into early summer. Clara taught at the school 5 days a week, gradually winning over the children and even some parents who commented on their children's renewed interest in learning. Mr. Peterson continued his disapproving observations, but Clara focused on the children's progress rather than his criticism. At home, she and Samuel established a comfortable routine. Clara tended the garden and prepared meals, while Samuel worked with his bees and made repairs around the homestead. In the evenings, they often sat in the library, reading or discussing the day's events. Samuel helped Clara prepare lessons, offering insights from his mother's teaching days or suggesting books from his grandmother's collection that might engage particular students. Their sleeping arrangement remained unchanged. Samuel on his cot in the corner of the bedroom, Clara in the main bed. Neither mentioned the temporary nature of this arrangement, though Clara sometimes caught Samuel watching her with an expression that made her wonder what he was thinking. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Clara found herself studying Samuel's profile. The scar that ran down his cheek no longer seemed remarkable to her. It was simply part of him, like the missing arm or the quiet strength that defined his character. "Tell me about the war," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the request. "You never speak of it." Samuel was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, His voice was low, barely audible above the evening. Chorus of insects. Not much to tell that isn't like 1,000 other stories. Young man full of patriotic fervor, battle, blood, death. Came home different. He stared into the distance. Lost my arm at Spotsylvania, cannon fire. Remember waking up in a field hospital, surgeon telling me I was lucky. Lucky? Clara echoed softly. A grimace that might have been a smile twisted Samuel's lips. To be alive, many weren't. He flexed his remaining hand, studying it as though seeing the memories written there. Spent 6 months in an army hospital. Fevers, infections, men screaming in the night. When they finally discharged me, my family was gone. Parents dead from fever, sister married and moved west. So you came here, Clara supplied, filling. In the gap, Samuel nodded, eventually drifted for a while, worked jobs no one else wanted, mining, grave digging, whatever didn't require 2 hands or a face that wouldn't frighten women and children. The matter-of-fact way he described his struggles made Clara's heart ache. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing the words were inadequate. He shrugged. "War changes. Everyone it touches. I was luckier than most. Found this place, found the bees." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "Found you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, more revealing than any passionate declaration might have been. Clara reached across the space, separating them, and placed her hand over his. "I'm glad you did," she said quietly. His fingers turned, interlacing with hers, and they sat in companionable silence as darkness settled over the mountains. The end of Clara's trial period approached with increasing tension. Mr. Peterson had submitted his evaluation to the council, a scathing document that criticized her permissive methods and failure to maintain proper discipline. But Clara had evidence of her own to present. Improved attendance, enthusiastic participation from previously withdrawn students, and even a letter signed by several parents praising their children's renewed interest in learning. The evening before the council meeting that would decide her fate, Clara sat at the kitchen table, preparing her statement. Samuel entered from checking the beehives, his expression troubled. "What is it?" Clara asked, setting down her pen. "Storm. Coming," he replied, glancing toward the windows where the evening sky had taken on an ominous greenish tinge. "Bad one from the look of it." As if in confirmation, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the mountains. Clara frowned. "Will it pass before morning? I need to be at the council meeting." Hard to say. These spring storms can be unpredictable. Samuel began gathering lanterns and checking their oil levels. Better prepare in case we lose light. They worked together, securing the homestead, bringing in extra firewood, checking windows and doors, making sure the animals were safely sheltered. By the time they finished, the wind had picked up considerably, bending the pines and sending loose items skittering across the yard. Inside, Clara returned to her preparation for the council meeting, but found it difficult to concentrate with the increasing howl of the wind and the sharp cracks of thunder that seemed to be moving closer. Samuel built up the fire and lit several lamps, casting the cabin in a warm, protective glow against the gathering storm. "You should rest," he suggested, noting her weariness. "Tomorrow will be challenging enough without exhaustion." Clara nodded, gathering her papers. "You're right, though I doubt I'll sleep much with this noise." As they prepared for bed, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the windows in sheets, and the wind found every crack and crevice in the cabin walls, creating an eerie whistling that set Clara's nerves on edge. Once in bed, she pulled the quilt up to her chin, listening to the cabin creak and groan around them. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the entire structure, and Clara gasped involuntarily. From his cot in the corner, Samuel's voice came through the darkness. "It's all right. This cabin has weathered worse." "I know," Clara replied, embarrassed by her reaction. I'm not usually frightened by storms, it's just so wild here. That's the mountain weather for you. Unpredictable, powerful. Another rumble of thunder punctuated his words. Like life itself, I suppose. The philosophical observation surprised Clara. I never thought of it that way. My grandmother used to say storms are just the mountains reminding us who's really in charge, Samuel said, his voice warm with the memory. She'd sit on the porch and watch them roll in, refusing to come inside until the last possible moment. She sounds like quite a woman, Clara remarked, grateful for the distraction from the storm's fury. She was. Wish I'd known her. A pause, then. Reminded me of you when I heard the stories. Strong-willed, independent, unafraid to face what needs facing. The comparison warmed Clara, especially coming from Samuel, who was usually so sparing with praise. Before she could respond, a deafening crack split the air, followed by a tremendous crash that shook the entire cabin. Clara sat bolt upright. In bed, heart racing. "Samuel," she called, her voice tight with fear. "I'm here." His voice came immediately, reassuring in the darkness. That sounded like a tree coming down, near the honey house from the direction. He rose, pulling on his boots and reaching for a lantern. "Stay here where it's safe. I need to check if there's damage." "You can't go out in this," Clara protested, throwing back her covers. "It's too dangerous." If a tree hit the honey house and damaged the roof, the whole season's harvest could be ruined. Samuel was already pulling on his coat. "I'll be careful." Clara quickly slipped into her own boots and shawl. "I'm coming with you." Samuel turned to argue, saw her determined expression, and merely nodded. "Stay close." The moment they opened the door, the full force of the storm hit them, driving rain that stung like needles and wind that nearly knocked Clara off her feet. Samuel steadied her with his arm, and together they battled their way across the yard toward the honey house. The lantern's flame guttered wildly in the wind, but provided just enough light to see the massive pine that had toppled across the path. Its upper branches had struck the honey house roof, though from their vantage point it was impossible to tell how severe the damage might be. "We need to get closer," Samuel shouted over the storm's roar. They picked their way carefully around the fallen tree, Clara clutching Samuel's arm as the mud sucked at her boots, and the wind threatened to send them both sprawling. As they neared the honey house, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene. In stark detail, the tree had punched a hole in the corner of the roof, and rain was already pouring in. Samuel handed Clara the lantern and immediately began climbing the short ladder attached to the side of the building. "Hold the light steady," he called down. "I need to see what I'm dealing with." Clara raised the lantern as high as she could, fighting to keep her balance in the gusting wind. Samuel reached the roof and began examining the damage, his movements hampered by having only one arm, but determined nonetheless. "The main support beam is still intact," he reported. "If I can get a tarp over it." His words were cut off by another savage gust of wind that nearly swept him from his precarious perch. Clara cried out in alarm, but Samuel managed to catch himself, clinging to the undamaged portion of the roof. "Samuel, please come down," Clara pleaded. "It's too dangerous." He hesitated, clearly torn between safeguarding his livelihood and risking his life in the process. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he began making his way back to the ladder. As he descended, Clara moved closer, holding the lantern to light his way. Suddenly, with a sound like a gunshot, one of the ladder rungs snapped under his weight. Samuel lurched sideways, losing his grip, and fell the remaining few feet to the ground with a heavy thud. "Samuel!" Clara dropped the lantern and rushed to his side, kneeling in the mud beside him. "Are you hurt?" He grimaced, struggling to sit up. "My shoulder," he managed through gritted teeth. "An ankle, twisted when I fell." Relief that he was conscious and alert quickly gave way to practical concern. "Can you stand? We need to get back to the cabin." With Clara's support, Samuel managed to get to his feet, though he couldn't put weight on his injured ankle. She positioned herself under his good arm, taking as much of his weight as she could, despite her own leg's protest. "Lean on me," she instructed, retrieving the miraculously still-lit lantern. "Slowly now." The journey back to the cabin was an ordeal that tested both their endurance. The wind seemed determined to topple them. The rain reduced visibility to mere feet, and the mud clutched at their boots with every step. Samuel's weight against Clara's side grew heavier as they progressed, his face tightening with pain. By the time they reached the cabin door, Clara's leg was screaming in agony, and Samuel was barely conscious, the combination of pain and exhaustion taking its toll. With a final surge of determination, she maneuvered them inside and guided Samuel to the nearest chair. "Stay awake," she ordered, quickly stoking the fire and lighting more lamps. "I need to examine your injuries." Samuel's eyes flickered open. The honey house. "We'll have to wait until morning," Clara said firmly, helping him remove his sodden coat. "Your health is more important than honey." Careful examination revealed a dislocated shoulder, the same side as his missing arm, tragically, and a badly sprained ankle. The shoulder would require immediate attention. Clara had seen her father pop a farmhand's shoulder back into place once and hoped she could remember the procedure correctly. "This will hurt," she warned, positioning herself beside the chair, "but it needs to be done now, before the muscles stiffen further." Samuel nodded grimly. "Do it." Clara took a deep breath, then with firm, steady hands manipulated the joint, as she remembered her father doing. Samuel's face went white with pain, but he made no sound beyond a sharp intake of breath. With a nauseating pop, the shoulder slid back into place. "Thank you," Samuel breathed, the relief evident in his voice. As the worst pain subsided, Clara quickly fashioned a sling from a clean dish towel, securing his arm against his body to prevent further movement. "The ankle needs wrapping, and then you need dry clothes and rest." Working efficiently despite her own exhaustion, Clara removed Samuel's mud-caked boots and examined his swollen ankle. It was badly sprained but not broken, a small mercy in a night that seemed determined to test them both. "I can manage," Samuel protested weakly as Clara began helping him remove his soaked shirt. "Nonsense," she replied with practical firmness. "You can barely stand, let alone undress yourself with one working arm." A flush crept up Samuel's neck, but he allowed her to assist him into dry clothes, her movements professional and matter-of-fact, despite the intimacy of the situation. When he was changed and seated near the fire, with his ankle propped on a stool, Clara finally attended to her own needs, changing quickly behind the bedroom screen. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, a different kind of shift was occurring. The crisis had stripped away the careful distance they had maintained, replacing it with something more elemental, the simple human connection of two people facing adversity together. Clara brought Samuel a cup of willow bark tea for the pain and settled beside him with her own. "The council meeting is tomorrow," she said, more to herself than to him. "I need to be there." Samuel studied her over the rim of his cup. "You won't make it to town in this," he said, nodding toward the windows where rain still lashed against the glass. "Even if the storm passes by morning, the creek will be flooded." Reality settled heavily on Clara's shoulders. Missing the council meeting could mean losing the teaching position she had worked so hard to secure. All her preparation, all the progress with the children, potentially lost because of a fallen tree and a rainstorm. "They'll assume I've given up," she said, unable to keep the distress from her voice. "Mr. Peterson will convince them his methods are better. When they see what you've accomplished with the children, they'll know better," Samuel assured her. "One missed meeting doesn't erase all you've done." Clara wasn't convinced, but exhaustion prevented further worry. She helped Samuel to the bedroom, where he insisted on taking the cot despite his injuries. "The bed would be more comfortable for you," Clara argued. and navigate the cot with your leg after all you've done tonight." Samuel shook his head. "I'll manage here." Too tired to argue further, Clara surrendered to the practical logic and settled into the bed. Despite her certainty that worry would keep her awake, she fell into exhausted sleep almost immediately. Morning brought watery sunshine and a landscape transformed by the storm's fury. Trees had been uprooted, fences flattened, and the creek that separated the homestead from town had indeed swollen to a raging torrent, confirming Samuel's prediction that travel would be impossible. Clara surveyed the damage from the porch, her heart sinking as she realized she would definitely miss the council meeting. Samuel joined her, moving slowly with the aid of a makeshift crutch he had fashioned from a broom handle. "You should be resting," she admonished, though without much hope of being heeded. "Too much to do," he replied simply. "Need to assess the damage, salvage what can be saved." They spent the morning taking inventory of the storm's impact. The honey house roof would need significant repairs, but miraculously, only 2 hives had been damaged. The garden had suffered, young plants flattened by wind and rain, but many could be salvaged with care. The most serious problem was the washed-out section of road near the creek, which would require days of work to restore. By midday, Clara had resigned herself to missing the council meeting and focused instead on helping where she could, despite Samuel's repeated insistence that she rest. She replanted what could be saved in the garden, prepared meals, and kept a watchful eye on Samuel, who refused to limit his activities despite his injuries. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever met," she informed him as she caught him attempting to move fallen branches one-handed. "You'll undo all my good work with that shoulder if you keep this up." Samuel's lip quirked in what might have been a smile. "Pot calling the kettle black, school teacher. You've barely stopped moving since dawn, and don't think I haven't noticed. Your limp is worse today." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Clara's leg throbbed mercilessly from the previous night's exertions, though she had tried to hide her discomfort. "We make quite a pair, don't we?" she conceded with a rueful smile. "That we do." Samuel's expression softened into something Clara couldn't quite interpret, warmth mixed with an emotion that made her heart beat a little faster. "Come sit with me a while. There's something I want to show you." Curious, Clara followed him to the porch, where he retrieved a small wooden box from a shelf. Opening it, he revealed a collection of carved wooden figures, each one an exquisitely detailed animal or bird. "You made these?" Clara asked, gently lifting a miniature owl, marveling at the precisely rendered feathers. Samuel nodded. "Started after the war. Surgeon said it would help with the fine motor skills in my remaining hand. Became something more over time." "They're beautiful," Clara said sincerely, examining each piece with growing appreciation. "True art." "Been working on something special lately," Samuel continued, reaching into his pocket. "Was going to wait for the right moment, but after last night." He opened his palm to reveal a small carved figure of a woman holding a book. Clara's breath caught as she recognized herself in the delicate carving. The sweep of her hair, the gentle curve of her face, even the slight irregularity in her stance that suggested her limp without emphasizing it. "Samuel," she whispered, deeply moved by the gift and what it represented. "Wanted you to know how I see you," he said simply. "Strong, beautiful, complete." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she accepted the carving, running her fingers over the smooth wood that had been shaped by his patient hands. No one had ever seen her so clearly or captured her essence with such compassion. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the emotions swelling in her chest. "It's the most precious gift I've ever received." Their eyes met, and the careful distance they had maintained dissolved in the afternoon sunlight. Samuel reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a tear from her cheek. Clara leaned into his touch, no longer afraid of the connection growing between them. "Clara," he began, his voice low and tender. "I know our marriage started as a practical arrangement, but I find myself—" The sound of hooves interrupted his words. They turned to see a rider approaching, Dr. Mills, making his way carefully along the damaged road. "Hello, the house," he called, dismounting with the vigor of a much younger man. "Came to check on you folks after that monstrous storm. Quite a bit of damage in town, too." Clara hastily wiped away her tears, while Samuel greeted the doctor. "Doctor." Mills assessed them both with a professional eye, noting Samuel's sling and Clara's pronounced limp. "Seems I arrived in time," he observed. "Let's have a look at those injuries." After examining Samuel's shoulder and ankle and Clara's inflamed leg, Dr. Mills pronounced them both on the mend, but in need of rest. "You've done an admirable job. With his shoulder, Mrs. Harper," he told Clara. "Clean relocation. Might have been a nurse in another life. Just practical experience," Clara demurred. "My father had frequent dislocations in his later years." "Well, you've a natural talent for healing," the doctor insisted, "which reminds me of the other reason for my visit." He reached into his saddlebag and extracted an official-looking document. "The council meeting was held this morning despite your absence. I brought the results." Clara's heart pounded as she accepted the paper, her hands trembling slightly. Samuel moved to stand. Beside her, his solid presence a comfort as she unfolded the document. "They voted unanimously to offer you the permanent position," Dr. Mills announced before she could read the words. Peterson's objections were overruled when parents began speaking up about their children's progress. Young Tommy Winters was particularly eloquent about how you made him feel smart instead of stupid for the first time in his life. Relief and joy washed over Clara. "Truly? Even without my being there to defend my methods?" "Your results spoke for themselves," Dr. Mills assured. "And I may have mentioned your heroic efforts during the mine disaster, which reminded several council members of their own debt to you." Clara turned to Samuel, her face radiant with happiness. "I did it," she whispered. "They accepted me, limp and all." Samuel's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Of course they did. Anyone who truly sees you could do nothing else." Dr. Mills watched this exchange with a knowing smile. "Well, I should head back before darkness falls. The creek's still running high, but passable on horseback. School's cancelled. For the week while they repair the roof, tree came down on that too. So rest that leg, Mrs. Harper, and make sure this stubborn fellow rests his shoulder," he added with a nod toward Samuel. After the doctor departed, Clara and Samuel returned to the porch, sitting close together as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. The wooden carving rested in Clara's palm, a tangible representation of how far they had come from their first meeting at the train station. "What were you going to say before Dr. Mills arrived?" Clara asked softly. Samuel turned to her, his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "I was going to say that I find myself no longer thinking of our marriage as merely practical." He took a deep breath. "I find myself thinking of you as truly my wife in every sense of the word." Clara's heart quickened. "I've been thinking the same," she admitted. "These past weeks, working together, building a life together, it's become more than an arrangement to me. When I saw you last night, struggling through the storm to help me despite your own pain," Samuel continued, his voice thick with emotion, "I realized something I should have known from the first day. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Clara, and I find myself falling in love with that strength, with your kindness, with everything that makes you who you are." Tears threatened again as Clara looked at this man who had offered her a home when she was abandoned, who had seen value in her when others saw only limitation, who had carved her image with such care and understanding. "I think I've been falling in love with you since you helped me down from your wagon that first day," she confessed, Not because you rescued me, but because you never once looked at me with pity. You saw me, truly saw me. Samuel's hand gently cradled her face. May I kiss you, Clara? Not as part of a ceremony or obligation, but because I want to, very much. In answer, Clara leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that held none of the awkwardness of their wedding day. Only tenderness, longing, and the promise of a future chosen rather than merely accepted. When they finally parted, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Welcome home, Clara Harper," he murmured. Clara smiled, her heart full in a way she had never expected. When she first stepped off that train, "I'm home," she replied, "with you." That night, for the first time, they shared the bed as true husband and wife, finding in each other's arms the belonging they had both sought for so long. As moonlight filtered through the curtains, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from abandonment at a train station to this moment of completeness. A mail-order bride with a limp, left behind because of her perceived imperfection, had found her perfect match in a wounded veteran who recognized that true strength comes in many forms. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone, a marriage founded on respect, cemented by shared adversity, and transformed by love. As Clara drifted towards sleep, nestled in the protective circle of Samuel's arm, she realized that sometimes life's greatest disappointments lead to its greatest blessings. The man who had abandoned her at the station had actually set her free to find where she truly belonged, not as someone's convenient wife, but as an equal partner in creating a life of purpose, respect, and love. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.